The shrine world of Benedictia Prima burned beneath twin suns, its marble cathedrals cracking under the weight of something vast and terrible pressing against reality itself. Pilgrims screamed in the great plaza as the air itself began to bleed, crimson tears weeping from wounds in the warp. The golden aquillas adorning the Ecclesi Grandis Basilica twisted, their wings folding inward as though in supplication to a darker master. Sister Superior Cassia of the Order of the Sacred Rose felt the change before she saw it. Her psychic hood registered the disturbance as a migraine that drove nails through her skull. But beneath the pain lay something worse: recognition. The warp signature pressing through the veil carried the taste of ancient dominion, of will so absolute it bent lesser minds like heated steel. The breach opened above the Cathedral of St. Marius with a sound like reality tearing. Darkness poured forth, not the chaotic darkness of the warp, but something ordered, purposeful. It coalesced into a towering figure wreathed in flame and shadow, his armour black as the void between stars. Upon his hand gleamed a simple golden band that seemed to drink in the light of both suns. Sauron the Great, the necromancer, the Dark Lord of Mordor, stepped onto the hallowed stones of an imperial shrine world. The ring pulsed with power that had once enslaved entire races, and here, in this galaxy of endless war, it found fertile ground. The pilgrims nearest to the cathedral fell to their knees first, not in terror, though that would have been natural, but in worship. The Dark Lord's presence pressed against their minds like a gentle hand, whispering of order, of purpose, of an end to the galaxy's endless suffering under a single guiding will. Many wept with joy as they felt their burdens lifted, their choices taken from them. Sister Cassia drew her bolt pistol and opened a Vox channel to the Planetary Defense Command. "This is Cassia 77 requesting immediate orbital bombardment on my position. We have a category extremist psycho manifestation in Cathedral Square." "Sister," came the reply, and she could hear the strain in the Vox officer's voice. "Negative on bombardment, Lord Governor's orders. The new saint is to be protected at all costs." The bolt pistol trembled in her grip. Saint. They already called him Saint. Around the Dark Lord, reality continued to warp. The marble stones beneath his feet turned to black basalt arranged in perfect geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The air shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with the twin suns overhead. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire plaza without need for amplification. "Children of this cold galaxy," Sauron inned, and each word was a key turning in locks the listeners did not know they possessed. "Long have you suffered under gods who demand worship but give no order. Long have you bled for emperors who promise unity but deliver only war. I offer you peace. I offer you purpose. I offer you dominion." The crowd swelled as more pilgrims poured into the square, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. The ring's influence spread like a virus through the population, each converted soul becoming a beacon that called to others. Sister Cassia watched in horror as her own battle sisters removed their helmets, their faces slack with the terrible contentment of the enslaved. Only she remained unaffected, her psychic hood's machine spirit screaming warnings that kept the ring's whispers at bay. For now, the Dark Lord raised his hand, and the ring blazed with inner fire. "Who among you will serve willingly? Who among you will help me forge a new order from the ashes of the old?" The response was immediate. Thousands of voices rose in unison, chanting words in a language that had never been heard in this galaxy, but somehow felt familiar to every human throat that spoke them. The black speech of Mordor carried across dimensions by will alone. Sister Cassia keyed her Vox again, switching to an encrypted Inquisition channel. "This is Cassia 77. Authorization Vermilion Omega Sanctus. I need immediate Ordo Malleus intervention on Benedictia Prima. We have a potential Daemon Prince manifestation with widespread psychic domination effects. The entire planetary government has been compromised." Static answered her for long seconds before a cold mechanical voice responded. "Sister Superior, this is Inquisitor Vex of the Order Malleus. We are already en route. Maintain your position and gather intelligence. Do not engage directly. Easy words to speak." Harder to obey when she watched children press their faces against the Dark Lord's armoured legs, their eyes reflecting the ring's golden light like tiny suns. The transformation of Benedictia Prima accelerated over the following days. Sauron established his seat of power in the Cathedral of St. Murius, but his influence spread far beyond those hallowed walls. The planet's industrial centers retooled themselves to produce arms and armor in designs that belonged to no known STC template. Forge masters worked without sleep, their hands guided by visions of perfect construction, creating weapons that seemed to hunger for war. The PDF regiments renamed themselves the Legions of the Eye. Their uniforms dyed black and marked with the lidless eye that watched from banners throughout the world. They marched in perfect synchronization, their movements coordinated by a will that transcended normal human command structures. Even their vox chatter ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that spoke of minds linked in ways the Imperium's doctrines would call heretical. Sister Cassia moved through this transformed world like a ghost, her psychic hood's machine spirits working overtime to maintain her mental independence. She documented everything, uploading encrypted reports to hidden data caches for eventual Inquisition retrieval. The speed of the conversion terrified her more than the conversion itself. On the fourth day, she witnessed the first of Sauron's great works. The Dark Lord stood in the central plaza, now expanded into a vast circle of black stone. Before him knelt 300 of the world's most skilled techepts, their mechondrites writhing in mechanical ecstasy. Behind them, 10,000 tons of raw materials had been arranged in precise geometric patterns. "Watch," Sauron commanded, and every soul on the planet felt compelled to observe. Watch and understand the power of order. The ring blazed, and the materials began to move, not through mere telekinesis, but through will made manifest. Iron flowed like water. Ceramite shaped itself into perfect curves. Adamantium threads with themselves into patterns more complex than any human mind could comprehend. The tech adepts chanted in binary K, but their prayers were addressed to no omniscire the Imperium would recognize. What emerged was a fortress, not built, but grown, as though the Dark Lord's will had convinced the very atoms that they had always been arranged in this configuration. Black towers rose in perfect symmetry around a central keep, whose uppermost spire bore a great eye wrought in some material that seemed to be living flame. The fortress was a replica of Barad-dûr, scaled to accommodate human proportions, and its presence made the very air taste of ash and dominion. The tech adepts rose from their positions, their augmentics, now incorporating elements that no Mechanicus doctrine would approve. Their optical sensors had been replaced by single red lenses that tracked movement with predatory precision. Their vox grills had been modified to produce harmonics that made unaugmented humans more susceptible to command. Sister Cassia's vox crackled. "This is Inquisitor Vex. We are beginning orbital descent. Prepare for extraction in 6 hours." She looked up at the sky where new stars had appeared, their light cold and unwelcome. The Inquisition fleet had arrived, but she wondered if it would be enough. The first engagement began at dawn on the 7th day. The Inquisition strike force comprised 3 companies of Grey Knights supported by elements of the Imperial Navy and a full regiment of stormtroopers. They made planetfall under cover of orbital bombardment, expecting to face corrupted PDF forces and perhaps a rogue psyker. Instead, they found an army. The Legions of the Eye numbered in the hundreds of thousands now, swelled by pilgrims from across the sector who had felt the Dark Lord's call. They wore armor of a pattern that seemed to shift between familiar and alien, incorporating design elements that spoke to some deep genetic memory of warfare perfected. Their weapons fired bolts of coherent energy that could punch through ceramite as easily as flesh. More disturbing were the creatures that marched alongside them. Sauron's will had reached out across the warp, touching the minds of feral orc tribes in nearby systems. To them, he was the ultimate war boss, the big boss of big bosses, and they came screaming through the void in ramshackle ships to serve under his banner. But these were not the chaotic anarchic orcs the Imperium knew. These fought with discipline, with strategy, with purpose beyond simple violence. Brother Captain Stern of the Grey Knights led the first assault wave personally, his force weapon crackling with anti-demonic energies. His strike force hit the outer perimeter of Sauron's domain like a silver spear, cutting through the first ranks of corrupted guardsmen with the precision that only the Emperor's finest could achieve. The Legions of the Eye responded without panic, without the confusion that usually marked human forces under assault. They fell back in good order. Their movements coordinated to funnel the Grey Knights toward a killing ground between 2 of the fortress's outer towers. "Something's wrong, Vox Justica, Alaric. They're too organized, too calm. It's like fighting servitors, but they're making tactical decisions." Brother Captain Stern's psychic senses were screaming warnings. The enemy's coordination went beyond mere discipline. Every soldier in the legions moved as though they were extensions of a single mind, responding to threats and opportunities with inhuman speed and precision. The trap revealed itself when the first Grey Knight reached the killing ground. Energy weapons opened fire from concealed positions, but they were not the crude last weapons the Imperium expected. These beams cut through blessed ceramite like it was parchment. Their frequency modulated to disrupt the protective wards woven into Terminator armor. 2 Grey Knights fell in the first volley, 2 of the Emperor's finest slain by weapons that should not have existed. The Orcs attacked from the flanks, but these were not the wild charges of green-skinned mobs. They advanced in formation, their crude weapons replaced by implements of war that married Orc brutality with something approaching elegance. Their war cries had changed too, incorporating elements of the black speech that made even Grey Knight resolve waver. "Fall back," ordered Brother Captain Stern, but the retreat was not clean. The legions pressed their advantage with mechanical precision, their overlapping fields of fire making extraction costly. By the time the Grey Knights reached their extraction point, a full squad had been lost. Worse, the enemy had captured one of their fallen. As the Thunderhawks lifted off, Stern watched through optical enhancers as robed figures carried the Grey Knight's body toward the Dark Fortress. Whatever Sauron intended for the corpse of one of the Emperor's angels, it would not be pleasant. The orbital bombardment began 6 hours after the failed ground assault. Inquisitor Vex had authorized the use of cyclonic torpedoes against specific targets, accepting the loss of Benedictia Prima's civilian population as necessary to prevent whatever horror was taking shape on the surface. The torpedoes struck the Dark Fortress dead center, each warhead carrying enough destructive force to crack continents. The explosions were visible from orbit, brilliant flowers of nuclear fire that should have reduced any structure to radioactive ash. When the flames cleared, the fortress stood unchanged. More than unchanged, it had grown. The black towers now reached higher into the atmosphere, and new structures had sprouted from the original design like some obscene crystalline growth. The great eye at top, the central spire, blazed with light that penetrated the nuclear firestorm, its gaze turning toward the fleet in orbit with unmistakable intent. "How?" whispered Inquisitor Vex, his augment voice box struggling to process the implications. The answer came in the form of a Vox transmission that somehow penetrated the fleet's most sophisticated encryption protocols. Sauron's voice spoke directly into the command bridge of every ship simultaneously, each word carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "Children of a false emperor," the Dark Lord intoned, "your weapons cannot touch what is built by will alone. Your armies cannot stand against purpose perfected. I do not seek your destruction. I seek your conversion. Serve willingly and know peace. Resist and learn the price of defying order." The transmission cut off, but its effects were immediate. Across the fleet, crew members began removing their helmets, their faces taking on the slack expression of the converted. Vox operators stopped relaying orders and began chanting in the black speech. Even some of the Grey Knights felt their resolve wavering as the ring's influence pressed against their psychically enhanced minds. Inquisitor Vex made the hardest decision of his long career. All ships, immediate warp translation, emergency protocols, were falling back to Cadia. The fleet fled. Behind them, Benedictia Prima continued its transformation, becoming something the galaxy had never seen. A world united under a single will, its every citizen working toward a common purpose without dissent, without rebellion, without the chaos that defined human nature. In his dark tower, Sauron felt the approaching storm. The warp currents around Benedictia Prima had grown turbulent, carrying whispers of entities that called themselves gods, but were really just parasites feeding on emotion and chaos. They were curious about him. These ruinous powers. Sensing in his presence both opportunity and threat, Kay was the first to make contact, his voice echoing through dimensions with the sound of eternal warfare. "Dark Lord," the blood god rumbled, his words tasting of brass and skulls. "Your conquest has drawn my attention. Join with me, and I will grant you armies beyond counting. Together, we will drown this galaxy in blood." Sauron's response was a pulse of pure will that made the warp itself recoil. "I am no servant, blood god. I am dominion itself. Your chaos is antithetical to my purpose." T tried next, his multi-layered voice weaving patterns of possibility and change. "Ah, but change is the only constant. Lord of the Ring, Your order is just another form of evolution. Let me show you the paths to greater power. The ways to remake not just worlds, but reality itself. Your changes serve no purpose but change itself. Sauron replied, I seek not transformation but perfection. Your whispers fall on deaf ears. Nurgle's approach was different, offering acceptance and an end to struggle. Rest, Dark Lord. Let your ring join with my garden where all things find peace in decay. Your subjects suffer in their perfection. I offer them release. Your peace is stagnation. Your release is surrender. I offer neither. Finally, Slaanesh came with promises of sensation and experience beyond mortal comprehension. The Prince of Pleasure's voice was honey and poison, desire and fulfillment combined. You have ruled before, Dark Lord, but have you truly experienced rule? The taste of absolute power, the sensation of perfect control, the pleasure of watching your enemies break themselves against your will. I can show you depths of domination you have never imagined. This time, Sauron paused before responding. Of all the Chaos gods, Slain came closest to understanding what he truly was, but even the Prince of Pleasure missed the essential truth. I do not seek to experience power, Sauron said finally. I am power. I do not desire control. I am control. Your pleasures are distractions from purpose. I have no need of them. The Chaos gods withdrew, but Sauron knew they would return. They were parasites, and he was something new in their galaxy, a source of order so absolute that it might starve them of the chaos they fed upon. They would either corrupt him or destroy him. There was no middle ground. He turned his attention to more immediate concerns. His fortress was complete, but it was only the beginning. The ring's power had limits in this dimension, constrained by physical laws that did not exist in his original realm. He needed more than just human converts. He needed infrastructure, technology, the ability to project his will across the vast distances of interstellar space. The solution came in the form of an unexpected ally. Magos's Dominus Valin of the Dark Mechanicum had been monitoring the situation on Benedictia Prima with growing interest. Unlike his orthodox brethren, he recognized Sauron not as a daemon or a false god, but as something potentially far more valuable, a source of pure knowledge untainted by the whispers of chaos. His ship, the Forge of Blasphemy, materialized in the outer system 3 weeks after the Inquisition's retreat. The vessel was a kilometre-long cathedral of corroded metal and forbidden technology, its machine spirits bound by pacts that would horrify the Adeptus Mechanicus. But Farron's message when it came was free of chaos taint. Lord of Dominion, the Maros transmitted, I offer you my knowledge and my forges. In return, I ask only to study the principles by which your power operates. There is much we could accomplish together. Sauron considered the offer. The Dark Mechanicum's resources would accelerate his plans considerably. And unlike the Chaos gods, Fallon seemed to understand that knowledge without purpose was merely entertainment. Come, he commanded, let us discuss terms. The negotiations took place in the uppermost chamber of the Dark Fortress beneath the burning eye that now served as Sauron's primary seat of power. Maros Fallon arrived with a full escort of tech adepts and battle servitors, but he left them at the tower's base. This conversation required privacy. The Dark Lord received his visitor seated upon a throne of a living metal that had shaped itself from the tower's walls. The ring pulsed gently on his finger, its light reflecting off the chamber's black surfaces in patterns that hurt organic eyes to follow. You are not what I expected, Van admitted, his vox grill producing harmonics of genuine curiosity. The Chaos gods leave traces in the warp, signatures of their passage. You leave only silence. I am not of chaos, Sauron replied. I am order given form. Your dark gods create through destruction. I create through will alone. Valen's optical sensors flickered as he processed this information. Show me. Sauron raised his hand and the ring blazed. The chamber's walls began to flow like water, reshaping themselves into impossible geometries that somehow remained structurally sound. New machines grew from the floor, their purposes unclear but their craftsmanship perfect. Every component was precisely where it needed to be. Every circuit optimized beyond the capability of even the finest tech priest. Remarkable, Fallon breathed. No prayers to machine spirits, no rites of activation, pure applied will. How do you interface with the technology? What protocols do you use to communicate with the machine's consciousness? There are no machine spirits, Sauron said simply. There is only matter arranged according to my design. The machines function because I will them to function. The concept was so alien to Mechanicum doctrine that Valen's logic engines actually stuttered as they attempted to process it. In his worldview, all technology possessed some degree of consciousness, some spark of the divine that required appeasement and negotiation. The idea of pure mechanical function without spiritual component was revolutionary. "I will help you," the Magos declared, "but I need access to your methods. I need to understand how you achieve this level of technological control without invoking the machine's spirit." "You may observe," Sauron agreed, "but understand this, my knowledge is not freely given. You will serve my purposes first, your understanding comes second." The alliance was sealed with a gesture that would have seemed simple to any observer, but carried profound implications for both parties. Sauron placed the ring-bearing hand on Valon's skull, and for a brief moment the Magos experienced perfect order. Every circuit in his augment body functioned at optimal efficiency, every calculation processed without error, every mechanical component moved in perfect harmony. It was the closest thing to religious ecstasy Van had ever experienced, and it came without a single prayer to the Omnissiah. Work began immediately. Valen's forged ship took position in orbit around Benedictia Prima, its manufacturing capabilities merging with the planet's transformed industrial base. New designs flowed from Sauron's will into the fabrication centers, weapons and vehicles that married the Dark Lord's vision with the galaxy's technological base. The Orcs proved surprisingly adaptable to these new creations. Their innate understanding of machinery translated well to Sauron's more logical approach to design, and soon they were producing war machines that retained their characteristic brutality, while gaining unprecedented reliability and efficiency. More concerning for the wider galaxy were the ships that began taking shape in the system's asteroid fields. Sauron's fleet would be small compared to Imperial Navy standards, but each vessel incorporated design principles that maximized effectiveness. They were built not for glory or intimidation, but for victory. The first test of these new capabilities came when a tow exploration fleet entered the outer system, drawn by long-range sensor readings that suggested advanced human technology. The tower approached with their usual combination of curiosity and condescension. Confident in their technological superiority, they encountered Sauron's patrol squadron 3 days out from Benedictia Prima, a single heavy cruiser escorted by 4 destroyers, all constructed according to the Dark Lord's specifications. The tow fleet consisted of a full cadre, including their latest battleship and multiple hunter cadres. The engagement lasted 17 minutes. The tower opened fire at maximum range, their ion cannons and railguns targeting what they assumed were primitive Imperial designs. Their weapons struck home, but the enemy ship's hull plating was not standard ceramite or plastile. It was something denser, more resilient, arranged in patterns that dispersed energy with impossible efficiency. The return fire was devastating. Sauron's ships mounted weapons that appeared to be energy-based, but functioned according to principles the Tau could not analyze quickly enough to counter. The beams punched through their shield generators as though they were not there, targeting critical systems with precision that suggested perfect intelligence gathering. Worse was the psychological effect on the tow crews. The enemy ships broadcast no challenges, made no demands for surrender. They simply fired with mechanical precision, their shots calculated to disable rather than destroy. It was clear they intended to take prisoners. Shalior Eskar, commander of the Tau fleet, made the decision to retreat when his flagship's shields failed and boarding pods began launching from the enemy cruiser. His ships scattered, using their superior speed to open the range, but 3 of his escorts were too badly damaged to escape. The captured Tau were taken to Sauron's fortress, where they discovered that resistance was not only futile, but unnecessary. The Ring's influence worked differently on their species. Less direct domination, and more a gradual realization that cooperation served their greater good. Within days, they were working alongside human and orc technicians, their natural innovation augmented by the Dark Lord's vision of perfect order. The knowledge they provided about the galaxy's broader political situation was invaluable. Sauron learned of the Imperium's vast scope, of the Tyrannid threat, of the Necron awakening, and the Eldar's decline. He began to understand the true scale of the task before him. Not just one world or one system, but an entire galaxy fractured by warfare and chaos. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to conquer through brute force, he would demonstrate the benefits of unity. World after world would see the prosperity and order of Benedictia Prima and choose to join willingly. Those who resisted would face armies that fought not from hatred or hunger, but from absolute certainty in their cause. But first he needed to deal with the gathering storm. The Imperium was mobilizing a response, and intelligence gathered from captured Vox transmissions suggested it would be massive. A full Crusade fleet led by Astarte's chapters and supported by Titan legions. They would arrive within months, and they would not be turned aside by demonstrations of technological superiority. Sauron stood in his tower's highest chamber, gazing out at the transformed world below. The legions of the Eye drilled in perfect formation, their movements synchronized to a degree that would impress even the most disciplined Space Marine chapter. Orc war machines rolled through streets that had been replanned for maximum efficiency, their crude bellowing replaced by purposeful mechanical sound. In orbit, Van's forges worked around the clock to produce the weapons and ships that would be needed for the coming battle. The Magos had thrown himself into the work with religious fervour, driven by his growing understanding of Sauron's methods. Each new design incorporated lessons learned from the previous, an iterative process of improvement that achieved perfection through pure application of will. The ring pulsed on Sauron's finger, its power resonating through the fortress and beyond. He felt the approach of the Crusade fleet like a distant thunderstorm, still days away, but growing stronger with each passing hour. When they arrived, they would find not the chaotic rebellion they expected, but something far more dangerous. An alternative to their failing Imperium, a vision of order that could unite the galaxy under a single will. The final battle for humanity's soul was about to begin, and Sauron the Great would not be found wanting. The ring had enslaved kings and broken kingdoms, but here in this galaxy of endless war, it would face its greatest test. Against the Emperor's chosen, against the fury of the estates, against the righteous anger of those who served the Golden Throne, he smiled, an expression terrible in its certainty. Let them come. Let them all come. The age of chaos was ending, and the age of dominion had begun. The sky above Benedictia Prima began to bleed light as the first ships of the Imperial Crusade translated from the warp. The stars themselves seemed to draw back in fear from what was descending toward the Shrine World. 3 Space Marine chapters, 2 Titan legions, and the full might of Battlefleet Obscurus. At their head flew the battle barge, eternal vigilance bearing the personal banner of Marshal Helbray of the Black Templars. This was not an expedition or a reconnaissance in force. This was extinction made manifest, the Imperium's final answer to a threat that could not be reasoned with or contained. They came not to conquer, but to purge, to burn away every trace of the heresy that had taken root in humanity's heart. Sauron felt their approach like a weight pressing against the warp. The combined fury of 10,000 Astartes focused on his destruction. The ring grew warm against his finger, responding to the proximity of such concentrated opposition. This would be the crucible in which his vision either proved its worth or perished in righteous fire. My lord. Valin's voice crackled through the tower's Vox system. The Imperial fleet masses at the system's edge. Long-range OPEX indicates they are preparing for immediate assault. No demands for surrender, no attempts at communication. They intend to destroy us utterly. Good, Sauron replied, his voice carrying across every Vox channel on the planet simultaneously. Let them come with their full strength. Let them see what order can accomplish when it stands united against chaos. The first engagement took place in the outer system where Sauron's patrol fleets had been positioned to delay the Imperial advance. The Dark Lord's ships were outnumbered 20-1, but they had been constructed with this exact scenario in mind. Each vessel was a perfect fusion of human engineering, and Sauron's will made manifest, their hulls inscribed with patterns that focused the ring's power across interstellar distances. The battle began with the traditional Imperial bombardment, macro cannons and lance batteries reaching across the void to eliminate the heretical fleet before the real assault began. The gunners were among the finest in the Imperium, their aim blessed by tech marines and guided by machine spirits that had served for millennia. Their shots struck home with devastating accuracy, but the results were not what doctrine predicted. Sauron's ships absorbed the impacts with hull plating that seemed to flow and reshape itself, dissipating energy through principles that violated several fundamental laws of physics. Where damage did occur, it repaired itself within minutes, the vessel's structure rebuilding according to templates held in the Dark Lord's perfect memory. The return fire was surgical in its precision. Each of Sauron's ships targeted a specific enemy vessel, their weapons calibrated not for maximum damage, but for optimal psychological effect. They crippled rather than destroyed, leaving Imperial crews alive to broadcast their horror as their ships lost power and began drifting helplessly through space. Captain Jerichus of the strike cruiser Righteous Fury watched in disbelief as his ship's void shields collapsed under weapons fire that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. The enemy beams didn't follow standard energy discharge patterns, instead appearing to calculate the most efficient path through his defences. "All ships, concentrate fire on the lead heretical vessel," he ordered. But even as the words left his lips, he knew it was too late. His ship was already dead, its reactor cycling down as mysterious system failures cascaded through every deck. The pattern repeated across the Imperial fleet. Superior numbers and firepower meant nothing when the enemy could predict and counter every tactical decision before it was implemented. It was not that Sauron's forces were faster or better armed, but that they fought with perfect coordination, every action calculated to achieve maximum strategic value. Marshal Helrek, commanding the assault from his flagship, recognized what was happening and made the decision that would define the campaign. "All ships, immediate advance to planetary orbit. We will not be defeated piecemeal by this heresy." The Imperial fleet surged forward, accepting heavy losses from the enemy's delaying actions, but maintaining enough cohesion to reach Benedictia Prima's orbital space. There they found not the desperate resistance they expected, but a welcome. The planet's surface was covered with landing zones, each one perfectly positioned to allow Imperial forces to deploy an optimal formation. The continents had been reshaped to create natural killing fields, but they were arranged to favour neither attacker nor defender. It was as though Sauron wanted a fair fight, a true test of will against will. Brother Marshal voxed Captain Grimalders from the reclusium of the Eternal Vigilance. "This reeks of trap. The heretics want us to land. They're offering us exactly what our tactical doctrine demands." "Then we shall give them what they desire," Helrek replied, "and in doing so we shall demonstrate why the Emperor's Astartes have never known defeat when righteousness guides their blade." The first wave launched within the hour. 2 full companies of Black Templars supported by elements from the Imperial fists and iron hands. They made planet fall under the guns of orbital defence platforms that could have reduced their drop pods to glowing slag, but which remained mysteriously silent. Brother Sergeant Ricard's pod struck the surface in what had once been the plaza before the Cathedral of St. Marius. The area had been transformed beyond recognition. The marble stones replaced by something that looked like volcanic glass arranged in geometric patterns. The cathedral itself had been rebuilt as a fortress monastery that rivaled anything on Terra, its walls inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. "Form up," Ricard commanded, his enhanced senses already detecting movement in the shadows around the landing zone. "Remember, brothers, these are not ordinary heretics. They fight with discipline and purpose. Do not underestimate their resolve." The legions of the Eye emerged from concealment with movements so synchronized they might have been choreographed. They wore armor that seemed to shift between black ceramite and something more organic. Their weapons trained on the Space Marines with mechanical precision, but they did not fire. Instead, they waited. The standoff stretched for long seconds, 2 armies facing each other across ground that had been sanctified by the blood of saints. Then a figure stepped forward from the enemy ranks, his presence so commanding that even art's conditioning could not entirely suppress the instinctive response to kneel. Sauron the Great walked among his troops like a general inspecting his forces before battle, but his attention was entirely focused on the Space Marines who had dared to set foot on his world. He wore no helmet, his face a study in ancient nobility corrupted by will so absolute it had become its own form of damnation. "Children of a dead emperor," he spoke, and his voice carried across the battlefield without technological aid. "You come to my world wearing the colours of those who kneel before corpses. I offer you a chance to serve a master who yet lives, who can grant you purpose beyond the mindless repetition of ancient failures." Brother Sergeant Ricard stepped forward, his chainsaw already growling in his grip. "We serve the Emperor of Mankind, whose light guides humanity through the darkness. We know no other master, and we will accept no other doctrine." "Your Emperor," Sauron replied, and there was something almost pitying in his tone, "sits rotting on a throne of bones while his kingdom crumbles around him. I offer you the chance to build something better, something permanent. The ring pulsed, and several of the younger Space Marines wavered. The artifact's influence pressed against their mental conditioning, seeking cracks in their certainty. For beings raised from birth to know only absolute faith, the sudden introduction of doubt was more devastating than any physical weapon. Brother Castor, barely past his century of service, felt his grip on his bolter loosen as foreign thoughts invaded his mind. Visions of a galaxy united under single purpose, of wars fought for construction rather than destruction, of humanity's potential finally realized under perfect guidance. Castor, Ricard snapped, his voice cutting through the psychic influence like a blade. Remember your oaths. Remember your purpose. Remember who you serve. The young Space Marine's training reasserted itself, his conditioning burning away the alien thoughts like acid. But the moment of weakness had been noted both by his brothers and by the enemy who watched with knowing eyes. You resist strongly, Sauron acknowledged. But resistance born of ignorance is not strength. It is merely fear dressed in the colours of righteousness. I will show you what your Emperor truly offers. The Dark Lord raised his hand, and the air around the Space Marines began to change. They found themselves standing not on the transformed surface of Benedictia Prima, but in the throne room of the Imperial Palace on Terra. The golden throne loomed before them, and upon it sat the desiccated form of their God-Emperor, maintained by machinery and will alone. But this was the throne room as it truly was, not as Imperial propaganda depicted it. The Emperor's form was withered beyond recognition, his flesh held together by cybernetic augmentations and the raw faith of 1 trillion souls. The chamber stank of decay and desperation. 10,000 years of stagnation made manifest. This is your God. Sauron intoned, his voice echoing in the psychic projection. A corpse that devours the souls of psychers to maintain a semblance of life. A tyrant who built an empire on lies and maintains it through fear. I offer you service to one who yet lives, who yet grows, who offers not mere survival, but dominion over destiny itself. Brother Sergeant Ricard felt his faith waver for the first time in 2 centuries of service. The vision felt real, more real than the countless Imperial propaganda images he had been raised on, but his conditioning ran deeper than doubt, and he drew upon lessons learned in the deepest vaults of the chapter monastery. Lies, he snarled, raising his bolt pistol toward the Dark Lord. Heretical visions meant to turn us from our oaths. The Emperor protects, and his light guides us through all darkness. The bolter around took Sauron in the chest, the mass-reactive shell detonating against his armour with enough force to stagger a Space Marine. The Dark Lord barely moved, the impact absorbed by metal that flowed like liquid to disperse the kinetic energy. Your faith is admirable, Sauron said, brushing ceramite dust from his breastplate. But faith without understanding is merely ignorance with conviction. Let me show you what your resistance costs. The vision changed, and suddenly the Space Marines were witnessing the final moments of 12 worlds. Imperial planets burning under tyrannid claws, chaos invasions that consumed entire sectors, orc-wags that left nothing but ash and bone. In each case, Imperial forces fought with desperate courage and died with meaningless heroism, their sacrifices achieving nothing beyond delaying inevitable defeat. This is the galaxy your Emperor offers, Sauron continued. Endless war without victory, heroic death without purpose, 10,000 years of stagnation while humanity's enemies grow stronger. I offer you an end to this futile cycle. The vision shifted once more, and the Space Marines saw what Benedictia Prima had become under Sauron's rule. Children played in streets free of fear while their parents worked with purpose and contentment. The old and infirm were cared for with technology that surpassed the Imperium's finest medical achievements. Crime had not been suppressed, but had simply ceased to exist. Every citizen's needs met so completely that desperation became impossible. No, Brother Castor whispered, his voice cracking with strain. This cannot be real. Peace is impossible. Humanity is flawed, greedy, selfish. We require constant vigilance to prevent our fall to chaos. Humanity is what you make of it. Sauron replied, Your Emperor made you into weapons, useful only for killing and dying. I make you into tools of creation, builders of tomorrow rather than guards of yesterday's failures. The psychic projection ended, reality reasserting itself with jarring suddenness. The Space Marines found themselves back on the volcanic glass of the transformed plaza, facing an army that waited with inhuman patience for their decision. Brother Sergeant Ricard felt the doubt eating at his resolve like acid, but his training held firm. "Brothers," he commanded, his voice carrying across the Vox with unshakable authority. "Remember your oaths. Remember your purpose. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects." His squad responded in unison, their voices creating a wall of sound that pushed back against the ring's insidious influence. Sauron nodded as though he had expected no other response. "Then you have chosen your fate. I am sorry. It must be this way." The battle erupted without warning. The legions of the Eye opened fire with weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics, their energy beams following curved trajectories that bypassed cover and found gaps in power armor with impossible precision. The Space Marines responded with their own devastating firepower, bolter rounds and plasma blasts, tearing through the first rank of enemy troops. But for every heretic that fell, 2 more seemed to take his place. The legions fought with a coordination that transcended normal human capability, each soldier knowing exactly where his comrades would be and what they would do. When a Space Marine took cover behind rubble, enemy fire would converge on that position from 3 different angles simultaneously. When the Astartes attempted a flanking maneuver, they found the enemy already repositioning to counter it. Brother Castor died first, his helmet cracked by an energy beam that had somehow calculated the exact frequency needed to disrupt his armor's protective field. Brother Marcus followed seconds later, overwhelmed by close combat specialists who moved with the fluid grace of dance partners. Rickard found himself fighting back-to-back with the surviving members of his squad, their ammunition running low as the enemy pressed in from all sides. His chainsaw carved through corrupted flesh with mechanical efficiency, but there seemed to be no end to the enemy forces. "Fall back to the extraction point," he ordered, knowing, even as he spoke, that there would be no extraction. The enemy had planned this engagement too carefully to allow survivors. That was when the orcs arrived. They came not with the wild howling of a traditional war, but with the disciplined roar of soldiers who fought for something greater than simple violence. These were not the chaotic mobs the Imperium had faced for 10 millennia, but formations that moved with purpose and struck with precision. Their vehicles were works of art that married brutal functionality with elegant design, battle wagons that could have passed for Imperial rhinos if not for their crude ornamentation. Their guns firing shells that had been machined to tolerances that would impress a tech marine. Deft dreads that moved with the coordinated precision of Imperial dreadnoughts, their weapon systems targeting the Space Marines' weak points with inhuman accuracy. The remaining members of Ricard's squad were overwhelmed within minutes, their heroic last stand reduced to statistical inevitability by enemies who fought without the passion that usually made combat unpredictable. But their sacrifice was not meaningless. Across the planet, similar engagements were taking place as the Imperial landing force met Sauron's legions in combat that would reshape both armies. The Space Marines fought with the desperate courage of those who knew they faced something beyond their understanding, while the legions pressed forward with the implacable certainty of perfect order. In orbit, Marshal Helbrecht received reports from the surface with growing alarm. His forces were not being defeated in any conventional sense. They were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that seemed to know their every move before they made it. Brother Marshal voxed Chaplain Grimalders from the surface. The enemy fights like no force we have ever encountered. They anticipate our tactics, counter our strategies, and adapt to our responses faster than should be possible. It is as though they share a single mind. "Then we shall shatter that mind," Helbrecht replied. "Prepare for orbital bombardment. Coordinates follow." The lance strikes began minutes later, beams of coherent energy reaching down from space to carve burning wounds in the planet's surface. They targeted command structures, communication nodes, and troop concentrations with a precision that only Imperial Navy gunnery specialists could achieve. The beams struck their targets perfectly, but the results were not what Doctrine predicted. The energy was absorbed by the strange material that covered much of the planet's surface, channeled through patterns that seemed to have been designed specifically for this purpose. Rather than causing destruction, the orbital strikes only seemed to strengthen the enemy's position. Worse, the planet began to fight back. Defense platforms that had remained silent throughout the initial landing phase suddenly came online, their weapons targeting the Imperial fleet with accuracy that bordered on the supernatural. These were not the crude defense lasers the Navy expected, but weapons that seemed to exist partially outside normal space, their beams following impossible trajectories to strike critical systems. The cruiser Emperor's Wrath died first, its reactor breaching as defense platform fire found a microscopic flaw in its armor plating. The destroyer Swift Justice followed moments later, her crew barely having time to register the attack before their ship became an expanding cloud of superheated gas. All ships evasive maneuvers, Hela ordered. But evasion was meaningless when the enemy could predict exactly where each vessel would be. The Imperial fleet found itself trapped in orbit around a world that had become a single vast weapon, its every surface turned toward their destruction. In his tower, Sauron felt the battle's rhythm like a vast symphony reaching its crescendo. The ring pulsed with power drawn from the conflict itself, each death feeding its influence and extending his control. This was what he had been created for, not just domination, but the perfect orchestration of war itself. But the Imperium had not spent 10 millennia conquering the galaxy without learning how to face impossible odds. Deep in the holds of the battle barge Eternal Vigilance, weapon systems that had been held in reserve since the Great Crusade began their activation sequences. Cyclonic torpedoes, each one capable of cracking a planet's crust. Virus bombs that could sterilize entire continents. The tools of Exterminatus reserved for threats that could not be allowed to spread. Marshal Helrek stood on his command bridge, watching the tactical displays that showed his fleet dying ship by ship. The decision he faced would define him for the rest of his service to the Emperor. Benedictia Prima had been a shrine world home to billions of Imperial citizens. To authorize Exterminatus would be to murder innocents on a scale that dwarfed most planetary conflicts. But the alternative was to allow whatever horror had taken root here to spread to other worlds, to corrupt other systems until the entire sector fell to this new form of heresy. Chaplain Grimaldis, he voxed to the surface. You have 10 minutes to extract whatever forces you can. After that, we cleanse this world in the Emperor's fire. Understood, Brother Marshal. The Emperor protects. The evacuation was a nightmare of desperate heroism. The surviving Imperial forces fought their way to extraction points, while the legions of the Eye pressed their advantage. Thunderhawks and Storm Eagles dove through defensive fire that seemed to predict their every maneuver, their pilots pushing their machines beyond safe operational limits to reach the scattered survivors. Many would not make it. Brothers who had served for centuries, guardsmen who had proven their faith on a dozen battlefields, naval officers whose families had served the Golden Throne since the heresy itself. They would die here, their sacrifices measured not in glory, but in the few more minutes their resistance bought for the evacuation effort. Sauron watched the Imperial retreat with something approaching regret. These warriors could have served his vision, could have been part of something greater than the endless cycle of violence that defined their existence. But they had chosen loyalty to a dying dream over service to a living will. He would honor their choice by ensuring their deaths had meaning. The cyclonic torpedoes launched from the Eternal Vigilance in a salvo that lit up the void like a second sun. Each warhead carried enough destructive power to kill continents, and they had been blessed by the chapter's most senior tech marines to ensure their machine spirits would not fail in their sacred duty. They struck the planet's surface simultaneously, their detonations coordinated to achieve maximum geological disruption. The resultant earthquakes should have torn Benedictia Prima apart at the seams, its continents cracking like eggs as magma erupted from wounds in its crust. Instead, the explosions were absorbed by the same strange material that had neutralized the orbital bombardment. The planet's surface rippled like water, dissipating the kinetic energy through patterns that defied several fundamental laws of physics. When the fires cleared, Sauron's fortress stood unchanged. If anything, it had grown larger, its towers reaching higher into the atmosphere as though fed by the very destruction meant to annihilate it. "Impossible," Marshal Helbra whispered, his enhanced vision struggling to process what his optical enhancers were showing him. "Nothing can survive a direct cyclonic bombardment. Nothing." The answer came in the form of a transmission that penetrated every Vox system in the Imperial fleet simultaneously. Sauron's voice spoke directly to every crew member, every space marine, every servitor that still possessed enough consciousness to understand language. "Children of a failing empire," the Dark Lord said, and his words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You have thrown your mightiest weapons against my will and found them wanting. Your Emperor's fire cannot touch what is built from purpose itself, but I bear you no malice for your resistance. You fought with honor, and honor has value even when it serves a flawed cause." The transmission paused, and in that silence, every Imperial servant felt the full weight of what they faced. This was not chaos with its promises of power and corruption. This was not Xenos aggression driven by alien hunger or ideology. This was order so perfect that it had become its own form of power, will so absolute that it could reshape reality itself. "I offer you one final chance," Sauron continued. "Serve willingly and know peace. Your skills will be valued, your experience honoured. You will build instead of merely destroying, create instead of simply killing. This galaxy has known 10,000 years of war. Is it not time for something better?" The effect was immediate and devastating. Across the Imperial fleet, crew members began removing their helmets, their faces taking on the slack expression of the converted. Ratings who had served faithfully for decades suddenly saw their duty in a new light, understanding that their loyalty had been misplaced. Tech adepts found their prayers to the Omnissiah, answered by a voice that spoke of logic and purpose rather than faith and superstition. Even some of the Space Marines felt their conditioning waver as the ring's influence pressed against their enhanced psyches. The promise of peace, of an end to the endless cycle of violence that defined their existence, was more seductive than any corruption chaos had ever offered. Marshal Helrek felt his own will begin to bend as the Dark Lord's voice continued its terrible sermon. The ring's power reached across space itself, carried by communication systems that had been blessed by generations of tech marines and sanctified by the prayers of countless faithful. It was as though the very technology they depended on had turned against them. But the Marshal was not merely a space marine. He was a champion of the Black Templars, a warrior who had proven his faith in battles across the galaxy. His will had been tempered in fires that would break lesser men, and his loyalty to the Emperor ran deeper than conscious thought. "All ships," he commanded, his voice cutting through the psychic influence like a blessed blade. "Emergency warp translation, immediate departure from this system." The order was almost ignored. Across the fleet, navigation officers stared at their instruments with glazed eyes, their minds struggling to process commands that ran counter to the new understanding that had been gifted to them. But Imperial discipline ran deep, and the threat of servitor-monitored punishment was enough to overcome even the ring's influence. The fleet translated to warp space in a series of uncoordinated jumps that scattered the surviving ships across half a sector. Behind them, Benedictia Prima continued its slow transformation, becoming something the galaxy had never seen, a world where order reigned supreme and every citizen served the greater good without question or doubt. In the deepest vaults of the eternal vigilance as the ship fled through the immaterium toward Cadia, Marshal Helrek composed the most difficult report of his long career. How could he explain what had happened? How could he describe an enemy that could not be destroyed by the Imperium's mightiest weapons, could not be reasoned with or corrupted, could not be understood through any framework his training had provided? The answer, when it came to him, was both simple and terrifying. He could not explain it because it was genuinely new. For 10,000 years the Imperium had faced the same threats, chaos in all its myriad forms, xenospecies that could be understood and countered, human rebellion that followed predictable patterns. This was something different. This was evolution. As the warp currents carried his flagship toward the fortress world of Cadia, Helrek began to compose a message that would reshape the Imperium's understanding of the threats it faced. Not a daemon prince or a rogue psyker, but something that might be far more dangerous. A vision of order so perfect that it could serve as an alternative to the Emperor's rule. Behind them, in the burning void where Benedictia Prima had become something beyond Imperial comprehension, Sauron the Great stood upon his tower and gazed out at the stars. The ring pulsed with power drawn from the recent conflict, its influence now extending beyond the boundaries of a single world. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 different planets, Imperial citizens would begin to dream of order. They would wake with questions about the necessity of their suffering, about the purpose of endless war, about whether there might not be a better way to organize human civilization. It would begin small, a governor wondering if compliance might be achieved through cooperation rather than force, a planetary defense commander questioning whether the Xenos truly required extermination or might be negotiated with, a tech marine discovering that his prayers were answered more readily when he spoke of logic rather than faith. The Imperium had survived 10,000 years of external threats, but it had never faced an enemy that could offer its citizens something genuinely better than what they already possessed. Hope was the most dangerous heresy of all, and Sauron the Great had brought hope to a galaxy that had forgotten it was possible. The Age of Dominion had begun, not with conquest, but with conversion, not with destruction, but with demonstration. The Dark Lord had learned patience in the long years of his exile, and now that patience would be rewarded, the galaxy would come to him willingly, one world at a time, until even the Golden Throne itself stood empty and forgotten. The corpse emperor would finally be allowed to rest. His long vigil ended by one who offered not faith but certainty, not struggle but peace. In the darkness between the stars, the ring pulsed with ancient power, and across 1,000,000 worlds humanity began to dream of something better,